The Happiest Day minigame occupies a unique and emotionally resonant place within Five Nights at Freddy because it represents the rare moment where the series allows itself to imagine release instead of endless suffering. Throughout the story, children are trapped in cycles of fear, confusion, and unfinished business, bound to the world by violence and neglect. Happiest Day stands apart because it suggests that healing, while fragile and difficult, is possible. It does not undo what happened, nor does it erase the horror that defines the series, but it reframes the narrative by offering the idea that closure can exist, even if it comes late and imperfectly. Visually, the minigame is deceptively simple, using bright colors, balloons, and a party setting that sharply contrasts with the darkness and decay seen elsewhere. This contrast is essential to its meaning. The joy presented is not loud or triumphant. It is quiet, almost fragile, as if it exists on the edge of dissolving. The masked children sitting around the table are motionless and expressionless, reinforcing the idea that this is not a real party in the conventional sense, but a reconstructed memory. It is an attempt to recreate something that should have happened, but never did. The birthday party becomes a symbol of stolen childhoods, a moment that was denied to the victims and must now be imagined after death. The central act of placing the cake before the child wearing the golden bear mask is the emotional core of the minigame. Birthdays in the series are consistently associated with trauma, most notably the fatal incident that occurs during a party meant to celebrate. By completing this ritual properly, without interruption or cruelty, the minigame symbolically corrects a foundational wrong. The act is not about celebration alone, but recognition. It acknowledges the child as someone who deserved happiness, care, and attention, rather than fear and suffering. This recognition is what allows the spirit to finally let go. The disappearance of the children after the cake is presented is one of the most powerful moments in the entire series. They do not vanish violently or dramatically, they simply fade away. This quiet exit emphasizes that their lingering presence was not fueled by malice, but by unresolved pain. Once that pain is addressed, even symbolically, there is no need for them to remain. The masks falling to the floor reinforce this idea. The animatronic identities, which have dominated the series as sources of terror, are revealed as shells, roles forced onto the children by circumstance. When the spirits leave, only empty costumes remain, stripped of the meaning they once carried. Happiest Day is also deeply connected to the idea of memory and reconstruction. The party does not claim to be the literal event that frees the children, but a spiritual or psychological representation of closure. Throughout the series, memories are fragmented, distorted, and unreliable. Happiest Day suggests that healing does not require perfect truth, only meaningful acknowledgement. The party may never have happened, but the feeling of being seen, celebrated, and cared for is enough. This aligns with the broader themes of the story, where the past cannot be changed, but its emotional consequences can be addressed. There is also an important ambiguity surrounding whether Happiest Day truly ends the suffering of all involved. Some interpretations suggest it frees only certain spirits, while others argue it represents an ideal ending rather than a canonical one. This ambiguity does not weaken the minigame. Instead, it reinforces its thematic role. Happiest Day is not a promise that everything is fixed, but a vision of what peace could look like. It exists as a counterbalance to the series' relentless despair, showing that the cycle of violence is not inevitable, even if breaking it is extraordinarily difficult. Ultimately, Happiest Day serves as the emotional thesis of Five Nights at Freddy's. It argues that the horror is not rooted in animatronics or haunted buildings, but in moments of neglect, cruelty, and stolen innocence. By reversing one such moment, even symbolically, the minigame affirms that what the children wanted was never revenge, but acknowledgement and care. The happiness offered is small, fragile, and long overdue, but it is enough. In a story defined by suffering, Happiest Day stands as a quiet insistence that the victims mattered, and that remembering them with compassion is the first step toward letting them rest. The question of when Happiest Day takes place is one of the most debated issues in the series, because the minigame exists in a space that feels deliberately untethered from linear time. Unlike most events, which can be roughly placed before or after specific incidents, Happiest Day behaves more like a culmination of emotional conditions rather than a moment on a calendar. This ambiguity has led to several competing theories, each of which reveals something different about how the story understands memory, death, and closure. Rather than contradicting one another outright, these interpretations often highlight different layers of meaning, suggesting that Happiest Day may operate on more than one level at once. One of the most common theories places Happiest Day after the events of the first game, interpreting it as the moment when the spirits of the murdered children are finally freed from the animatronics. In this reading, the gameplay leading up to Happiest Day represents a process of gathering fragmented memories and setting things right, culminating in a symbolic birthday party that allows the children to move on. The empty masks left behind strongly support this idea, as they visually suggest that the animatronics are no longer inhabited. This theory treats Happiest Day as a delayed resolution, implying that the children remained trapped for years, unable to rest until someone intervened in the correct way. The sadness of this interpretation lies in how long the children had to wait, while its hope comes from the idea that persistence and understanding can eventually bring peace. Another theory argues that Happiest Day occurs much earlier, possibly close to the time of the original murders, but on a spiritual or symbolic plane rather than in the physical world. In this view, the minigame does not represent a literal release that immediately changes the state of the animatronics, but an internal resolution for the children themselves. Their spirits may still linger, but their emotional suffering has been eased. This interpretation explains why the animatronics continue to behave as if haunted in later events, while still allowing Happiest Day to matter. The party becomes a moment of emotional truth rather than a mechanical turning point, suggesting that healing and haunting are not mutually exclusive in the logic of the series. A more complex interpretation places Happiest Day outside of linear time entirely, treating it as a constructed memory or shared spiritual space created from fragments of different moments. The party does not belong to one specific year or location, but instead exists as an idealized version of what should have happened. This aligns with the way the minigame is unlocked through disparate actions spread across different scenarios, as if pieces of reality must be gathered and reassembled before the moment can exist at all. In this theory, asking when Happiest Day takes place is almost the wrong question, because it does not happen once, but becomes accessible only when certain emotional and narrative conditions are met. It is less an event and more a destination. There is also a theory that ties Happiest Day specifically to the child associated with the Golden Bear mask, suggesting that the timing of the minigame corresponds to that child finally receiving peace, even if the others do not fully move on yet. In this reading, Happiest Day is not a universal ending, but a personal one. The focus on a single cake, a single child at the center of the table, and the careful framing of the scene support this interpretation. The other children fade away alongside him, but whether this represents their release or simply their participation in his closure is left unclear. This theory places Happiest Day at the moment when the most unresolved spirit finally lets go, which could occur much later than the deaths themselves. Finally, some interpretations view Happiest Day as a non-canonical or conditional ending, a vision of what could happen rather than what definitively does. In this framework, the minigame represents the best possible outcome, achieved only if certain actions are taken and certain truths are acknowledged. Its placement in time is therefore hypothetical. It exists as a moral statement rather than a historical one, asserting that remembrance, compassion, and correction of past wrongs can lead to peace, even if the main timeline does not fully achieve it. This interpretation explains why the series continues to explore suffering and unrest even after Happiest Day is shown, without invalidating its emotional power. What unites all of these theories is the idea that Happiest Day is not meant to function like a typical plot point. Its timing is fluid because its purpose is thematic rather than chronological. Whether it happens early, late, or outside of time altogether, it represents the moment when the story pauses to acknowledge what was lost and imagine what healing might look like. The uncertainty surrounding when it takes place mirrors the uncertainty of memory and trauma themselves, which do not unfold neatly or resolve on schedule. In that sense, Happiest Day happens whenever the story, or the player, is finally ready to understand why it matters.